Funeral home employees owners of Reddit, what's the most ridiculous outfit you've seen someone buried in? Shortly before my nan passed away, she emailed me a picture of her new sandals she bought. She got 2 pairs in 2 different colors, so the picture was her with one of each on. It was only fitting that we dressed her in those. She'd laugh if she knew. The last thing we did with my nana before she passed was take her to buy new sandals. She never wore them because she passed the next day. My great aunt wanted to be buried in her bathrobe. Her stepchildren honored it. To be fair though, she wanted her clothes to be donated to a homeless shelter she volunteered at and her jewelry to go to her kids. She wanted to be buried in her comfy bathrobe since it would cover her and not take too much away from what others may need. Most of the residents of the homeless shelter attended her funeral, more than half wearing an article of her former clothing. This is honestly so sweet, and I'm glad she got one of her final wishes. My grandma wanted to be buried in powder blue PJs because she wanted to be comfortable, so that's exactly what we did and she looked great. My grandpa was buried wearing blue PJs and a sleeping cap. My great grandmother worked as a clown, like she attended a clown college and everything. She loved her job very much. She was buried dressed as a clown, with the makeup and everything. That's a zombie that I would lose it over. My great aunt was buried in her 100 jazzercise classes taken t-shirt. She was super freaking proud of it, so it was fitting. Love that woman. She sounds like a good time. In my grandpa's case, the outfit was his birthday suit and a treasured blanket. When my grandpa died a few years ago, it was his wish that he be buried naked and wrapped in his favorite blanket, a blanket that my grandma handmade for him decades ago. Thankfully, the funeral home was very understanding of his wishes and had him in the casket naked with the blanket around him for his viewing and subsequent burial. My wife's grandma was buried with her favorite blanket. She always wrapped herself in it during her final illness and so requested we put it in the casket with her. She was clothed, but the outfit she was wearing was one she'd not fit into for years until ironically she got sick. It actually cheered her up knowing she had lost enough weight to wear it, so that's what we buried her in. My mom was a casual lady who excelled at dog rescue. When she passed, it didn't make sense to put her in a dress or suit. So she was cremated in her favorite comfy jeans and a "You'll Never Walk Alone" dog rescue t-shirt. Of all the things in here, this got me. We put a bottle of Imodium in my dad's pocket just in case he got the shoots in the afterlife. Funeral director thought we were bonkers. My husband's uncle was a very famous clown. Although he wasn't buried in his clown suit, clowns from across the tri-state area came in dressed to pay their respects. It was the strangest but most beautiful thing I ever seen. There was probably over 100 clowns at his funeral. But yet there was only one car in the parking lot. My grandmother had a deck of cards for 60+ years. They were frayed, stained, and you could barely read them. She refused to use any of the nice fancy new cards we gave her and never shared the story as to why they were so important to her. She was buried with those cards. It seemed like such a tender and intimate moment to place them next to her as if they were a huge token of her memories that were never meant to be shared. It's been 20 years. I still miss her beyond words. She didn't want to use another deck because she'd used them so long she knew each card and could easily cheat because she knew who held what. Just teasing. Sorry, hope I didn't upset you. She sounds like she was pretty cool. Not ridiculous so much as weird from the outside. My grandfather was buried with a folded up bunch of paper towels stuffed up his sleeve. He was one of those guys who always had something for spills and runny noses. And he always had paper towels or tissues with him. Turns out he had started keeping them in his sleeves when he was younger just in case he ever needed them. And with 5 kids and 11 grandkids, he always needed them. When he died, his sons decided it would be very fitting if he had some paper towels with him. So that's how he was during his viewing and service. Everyone is panic buying TP while my man is calm, cool and collected knowing he has the ace up his sleeve. I buried my late husband in a Superman t-shirt and his favorite camo pants and boots. He wore his camas when he went to chemotherapy. He called them his battle pants. I put in a poker chip from one of his mates, his BlackBerry, and a toy from our daughter. I always wonder what the archaeologists would make of it if he was ever exhumed. Archaeologist here. I'm pretty sure you accidentally started a trend in the academia of centuries from now where people write about techno-religious iconography and rituals involving metal bricks which were used to simulate communication with the ancestors. Slightly off topic, but my grandpa passed away last week and we had his visitation funeral on Friday. At the funeral home, the director asked when the last time he'd worn a suit was. We said it was probably for my grandma's funeral 6 months earlier. Apparently there were cookies in the pocket of the pants. Completely appropriate, given my grandpa was a child at heart who loved ice cream, cookies, and candy. We left the cookies in there. My mom was an avid bridge card game player. Our sweet funeral director researched a good winning hand in bridge. Mom was cremated holding her winning hand. We buried my grandpa with a winning hand in our favorite family card game. My dad was a firefighter. He died of lung cancer when I was 21. We decided to cremate him in his formal uniform, but my mom came out in front of our house full of family and friends with his large collection of superhero boxes and said the Flash or the Hulk. It was a really great moment to lighten the mood and brought his goofier side right back to life. We chose the Flash, by the way. We decided to cremate him in his formal uniform. Good thing you didn't pick his fireproof uniform. That could have taken a while. My grandmother. She was the kind of woman who wore shoulder pads and almost everything including t-shirts. My grandfather, a very practical and straightforward man, wanted to dress my grandmother in something she loved to wear all the time and always got tons of compliments on. I should also mention he is red-green colorblind. Bright colors do not stand out as much to him. It was a sleeveless button-up blouse that was covered in the good old stars and stripes. After some discussion with the rest of the family, we ended up choosing her second favorite outfit, a very tasteful silver dress, with shoulder pads of course. Side note, the casket was a lilac purple that Pawpaw would not budge on. It's one of my requests to have my shoes tied together when I'm buried. If my corpse ends up coming back to zombie terrorize society, I want people to have every advantage against my reanimated remains. Nah, give me the shoes with the pump and the tongue. I wanna fly when I'm eating brains, lol. Not a funeral home worker, but when my dad died we sent his favorite Crocs for his feet. They were Ohio State University merch, and he often wore them to church to preach in. Yes, you read that right. My dad was a pastor who preached in Ohio State University Crocs. He also had a hideous shirt that my mom tucked into the casket with him. My mom had tried to get rid of it several times, but my dad had a sixth sense and always rescued it from the donation pile. She didn't bury him in it because it didn't fit him anymore, but she let him take it with him. She finally got rid of that dang shirt. My uncle was buried in a Santa Claus outfit and I can say I'm scorned forever for Christmas. All I could think about was a Santa zombie chasing people. I didn't go to my great uncle's funeral, but this sounds like something he would do. He was a mall Santa for all my life though. I sang at a funeral where the man wanted to be buried with his brass stool from a local pub. He'd been a regular for years, and the pub acquiesced. It was weird to sing to a brass stool at the graveside portion of the funeral. As I remember, it had red leather inset on the seat. I've seen that word twice now in this thread, acquiesced. Now I'm gonna have to look it up. Edit. From my semi-extensive research I've found that it means to accept something reluctantly but without protest, often tacitly. My father was buried in his wetsuit. He loved to water ski and would go every weekend. I even had a matching one when I was a baby. My first husband was an avid fisherman. His parents insisted he be buried in a suit, but his favorite outfit was a pair of khaki shorts and a yellow base pro shirt. I asked the funeral director to put that outfit underneath the suit, and no one was the wiser. I put a couple of his favorite lures and his most well-loved pipe in his pocket. I don't doubt for a moment that the crematorium disposed of those items, but at least I knew I did right by him. Good for you. I think that's much more personal than a suit. I don't know if this counts, but it contains a wedding dress and basically someone's in it, so I'm just gonna say it. If it doesn't count it's okay. If it gets deleted I have to delete it. When my great grandmother died, Her wish was to be buried with her husband who had been cremated about 14 years earlier. But it's illegal here to bury two people in one grave unless it's asked like years before they die. So my grandmother had this plan. She had a pillow made of G grandmother's wedding dress. So my grandmother put G grandfather's ashes into the pillow. And when we could say our last farewells, we asked the funeral man, IDK what it's called in English, if we could change the original pillow for this one. He agreed and we were trying so hard not to laugh because we were smuggling G grandfather, who was dressed in a wedding dress, into the coffin illegally, and I swear I could hear G grandmother laugh through the wind. But that's a story for another time. Her funeral was wild. That's a beautiful story, and I love that you managed to illegally smuggle G grandfather's ashes in and fulfill her final wishes. And sounds like that was just the beginning of an awesome funeral, and in English the funeral man would be the funeral director. An old lady spent 40 odd years in her local church choir, so the family asked the choir if they could have her choir robe to bury her in, as it meant more to her than any of her ordinary clothes. The church I grew up in has a tradition where whenever a choir member dies, their robe will be draped over their chair in the choir loft for the funeral. Not a funeral home employee but an elderly friend of mine who was obsessed with space aliens demanded to be laid out in his Star Trek uniform. He looked good, everyone understood and were cool with it. His widow was fiercely protective of him. He left me one of his 5 Star Trek communication devices. High quality, too. Not a funeral home but I went to a family friend's funeral where the guy was just shirtless. He had a blanket covering up to his chest, so I'm not sure if he had pants. Warning, this is going to be graphic and kind of gross, but you're all gonna read it anyway, so let's do it. My husband's grandma died after a long battle with cancer and alcoholism. She had always been a small woman, but the two diseases wreaked havoc on her body and she had wasted away to a tiny waif of a person by the time she died. She also had a wickedly dirty sense of humor, which makes this story even better. Now, it should be noted that his family was grief-stricken but utterly exhausted, as those of you who have ever lost a person to a prolonged illness can understand. The day of the funeral arrived, and we were gathered around her open coffin saying our goodbyes. A somber, nervous funeral director came over to the eldest daughter and whispered something in her ear. She started to giggle and called the other siblings over, who started laughing out loud. Apparently, Granny's skin was thinner than they thought. While dressing her for her last party, the backs of both of her arms ripped open in several places. In order to make her appear normal from the front, the morticians had used duct tape to put her back together again. I can't even tell you what she was wearing, but I'll never forget a bunch of my in-laws laughing over their duct-taped grandma in a casket. It's so morbid, and she would have loved it. You were right, I read it anyway. My father always used to tell me he wanted his dead body stuffed and placed in the lobby of an adult movie theater. As a kid I did not understand what was funny about this, and now he denies he ever said it. My grandpa was buried in bib overalls and a plaid shirt. He was just a simple farmer and that's how he wanted to be seen for the last time. How my great grandfather was buried as well. My grandma was horribly embarrassed by the fact that she had dentures. We made absolutely sure that they were firmly in place when she was buried. My dad told the funeral director that if she was buried without her teeth, she would haunt us all. A couple of days after my grandma's funeral, we were at her house and my aunt went in the bathroom and yelled, "Oh, we sent grandma to heaven without any teeth." My dad went with a Mars bar and birthday cards. He died in a palliative care unit and someone in the family bought a Mars bar for a snack but forgot about it. After dad died, we were given a bag with his stuff in it. We emptied the bag but filled it up again with clothes we wanted him buried in and gave the bag to the undertaker. We went to see him a few days later, which was his birthday, and there he was with the Mars bar in his hands. It had been at the bottom of the bag and the undertaker thought there was a sentimental reason for the Mars bar. We thought it was very funny and we just let my dad go with his last ever chocolate bar. A friend of mine worked in the funeral business. She said a woman died and her husband and family were at odds. They felt like he killed her but they had no proof of it. Anyway, he had them dress her in a tiny sundress and asked for her breast implants because, quote, "I paid for them so they're mine." She said it was creepy and she felt so bad for the woman's family. What the frick? My grandfather always wore those dicky jumpsuits. When he passed, all the grandkids wanted to bury him in his favorite one, light blue, but my grandmother quickly put a stop to that. This was my neighbor growing up. I think he even went to church in them. When my parents died, my sister and I had to choose the clothes. Mum's was a simple dress she wore to church. My dad always wore cowboy boots. We chose his blue suit but couldn't find his black boots. We sent the brown ones, but I was beyond bothered about it. Found the black ones before the first viewing and had them changed out. My father would never have worn brown boots with his navy blue suit. I used to work in a morgue when I was an undergrad to help pay for tuition. One of my tasks was to dress the dead and place them in a casket. When I arrived to work, I located Miss Jane Doe, a 95-year-old lady, from our cooler and placed her on a silver table. I then proceeded to find her outfit that family has left us for Jane Doe to wear. As I take the clothes out of the bag, I quickly realized it's not the usual apparel for a woman in her 90s. It was a glittery black dress that came down mid-thigh, exposing cleavage, with spaghetti straps and a pair of red high heels. They also provided a thin scarf to go around her shoulders. I thought to myself, she is definitely dancing up in heaven now. Unfortunately, due to skin tear, we had to advise the family to use a less revealing attire. Kind of a different story, but my grandpa passed away and my aunt had recently lost a bet to him for $20. She wrote it as a check and put it in his pocket before they closed the casket. Funeral director here. I have two personal favorites. 1. A man who was dressed in a wizard's cloak. When I met with his wife and his mom, they kept describing him as mystics and magical, and I didn't quite understand why until the family gave me his clothes and explained that he was a wizard. Everyone that came to visiting was also wearing cloaks. 2. A woman who was dressed in a sequined ball gown, floor-length mink coat and a mink headband. She also has sequined high heels on. Can't forget to mention she was 86 and had multiple self-portraits around the room of herself. We also had a horse-drawn hearse bring her to church and the cemetery. I wanna be this lady. Actually, either of them. When my grandmother passed away, I put a skein of yarn and her knitting needles with her. When her husband, my grandpa, died, I put his favorite whiskey and a shot glass in his pocket. When my dad died, I put peach pits in his hands. He told me when I was little to make sure I did it so that he could grow into a peach tree and feed us. I never forgot. I kept my promise. He also called me Peaches. You are so very thoughtful to take care of your loved ones like that. Peaches is so adorable. I've had some different outfits, but in the funeral profession I could never class anything as ridiculous, as everyone is individual and it's so special to me how different people define themselves. However, here are some of the outfits that stuck with me as I found them so personal and touching. I've had one where the woman went in a full Christmas outfit in the middle of June. One where the man was wearing the dirtiest, smelliest dog-haired suit but were implicitly told to leave it, as it was him, which was just so lovely. An 83-year-old trans woman who never came out publicly, but her best friend who was arranging the funeral brought her in her best dress, killer heels and wig, even though no one at the funeral would have had a clue. I also gave her glam makeup and false eyelashes. If there is a heaven, she strutted in there like an absolute queen. A Jedi. These little things are why I love my job so much. You are doing such an awesome job. My grandpa insisted we bury my grandma in a tracksuit because she loved the color and never got a chance to wear it. I'm sure she arrived in heaven, looked down at herself, looked around at everyone in their Sunday best, and said, "You have got to be crapping me." I am not a funeral home employee, but me and my moms had a good laugh. It was still really sad when my great grandpa was buried in his clown suit because he requested that he'd be buried in it or hate everyone while watching from heaven. My cousin was wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, his basketball shorts and a pair of footy boots. He passed away of a rare cancer in his early 40s, only a few months after his mum. Seeing my uncle that day was one of the saddest things I ever saw. But after hearing what he was wearing underneath that coffin, all the sadness and tension in the room broke, and everyone erupted in laughter, and that's exactly what he would have wanted. I am not a funeral director. A friend of mine passed away in college due to a drug overdose. She was like super into tabletop gaming. Doctor Who, and anime. Her friends and family decided that the best way to honor her would be a cosplay funeral, so she was dressed in this steampunk Victorian dress that she had before she passed. Only about 1/3 of the people dressed in cosplay. I'll admit I took the lazy route by dressing up as David Tennant Doctor Who, the current Doctor, because the costume was literally a blue suit which I already owned. It was really nice to see all the DMs line up and put her character sheet into her coffin with her. I made sure to give her a complete set of dice, too. A cosplay funeral sounds fantastic, but honestly the DMs giving back her character sheets and you giving her a full set of dice brought a tear to my eye. I love D&D, and that's just a beautiful gesture. My former manager's grandson passed away from cancer when he was 6. He was an avid fan of Batman. They buried him a child-sized replica of Batman's costume. When my husband passed away I put a joint and a lighter in his pocket. Strangely he passed away on the 20th of April 2016. He loved the ganja. I guess this is something I can contribute to. When my oldest son died, I practically begged the funeral director to bury him with big boy underwear on. He was 6 and because of his condition, was never able to wear underwear, only diapers. I don't know why, but I just felt like when he got wherever he was going, he could finally be a big boy. We put him in some comfy pajamas, which is what he wore most of the time since he was immobile. My 4-year-old and I went to build a bear and he made him a Batman bear with a cowboy getup and with the voice button said, "I love you Connor. I really love you." He placed that in his little coffin. We also placed a couple letters L, one from his mother and I. I also wrote one from his 4-year-old brother who I guess didn't fully understand other than he knew Connor wasn't coming back. Still breaks my goddamn heart. I still wonder to this day when we visit him if that bear's battery still works. It'll be 6 years this the 7th of October. Welp, now I'm crying while I rock my 2-year-old to sleep. It never gets any easier. Electronic engineer here. With 7 years past and unused I can virtually guarantee that bear has a few I love you Connors left in it. 2032 coin cell has at least 10 years in a temperature stable environment before it fully self-discharges. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.